to the Futurebuild podcast, the place for critical conversations that shape the future of the built environment. I'm Martin Hurn, Event Director at Futurebuild, and today's episode is part of our Retrofit Mini Series. And we're diving deep into one of the UK's most scalable, yet often misunderstood, decarbonisation technologies, ground source heat pumps. Our guest today is Stuart Gadsden, Commercial Director at Kensa Contracting. Stuart has spent the last 12 years at the forefront of low carbon heating in social housing, working with local authorities, housing associations and policymakers to take shared ground loop systems from fringe concept to recognised policy. We'll explore the technology, tackle the misperceptions and share real case studies and look ahead to the next wave of innovation in ground source heating. So, let's welcome Stuart. Stuart, an absolute pleasure to have you on the podcast today.
Great to be here. Thanks for inviting me, Martin.
We always start off with trying to actually get behind what got you into the built environment, and in particular into sort of sustainable heating and decarbonisation.
Yeah, sure. So at school, I was really interested in science and geography, and I'd go home and say to my mum and dad, look, we've got to do our bit. So I got us doing recycling. I guess that was the first thing. And then as I went through school, I thought it'd be good to go to university. Went to a university open day and was inspired by a lecturer to get involved in the built environment. He basically was pointing out that you can change people's lives. You can change the world, actually. And I'd always, as a little kid, wanted to change the world. And I thought, that's for me. So I went and studied environmental engineering and learnt about renewable energy. And that was the bit of the built environment that really excited me. It was like, we can do something different. We don't need to keep putting gas and burning gas or burning oil. We can actually generate our own energy and we can use it to heat our homes, heat our buildings. And that got me really interested and excited. And then I've worked for some consulting engineering companies. I did a stint in local authorities. So I've sort of seen what it's like to be in the public sector with limited funding, and you're trying to make people's lives better. And then I managed to find my way eventually to Kensa, working for the ground source heat pump manufacturing and installation company, where, I guess the bit that really drives me is, can we tackle climate change? Can we decarbonise our heating in the UK? But at the same time, can we make people's lives better? Reduce energy bills, take people out of fuel poverty. And, I'm a big believer in that everyone should have equal opportunity. We should have a fair and just society. And I think renewable energy can help us do that.
So a big part of your role is working with the housing providers across the UK, especially social housing as well. Now, they've all got this sort of common objective at the moment to decarbonise. What's some of the sort of the challenges they've got?
Yeah, so one of the big challenges that they've all got is a lack of funding. So they all want to make their properties better. They genuinely want to make the lives of their residents better. And, it's their stock. If they look after their stock, it will clearly last in the long term, but they don't have funding. So, it's trying to work with them to unlock funding, whether it be government funding, whether it be private finance. I think part of the other issue is a little bit of fear of the unknown. Kensa's been going for 26 years. Heat pump technology's been going for over 100 years. It's not new, but to many people, it's new to them, new to their organisations. So you've got to take them on a journey. You've got to educate them, and I guess earn their trust that the solutions will actually make people's lives better. Yeah,
many people are obviously aware of heat pumps and are seeing them across the news as the sort of future of heating. But maybe not many people have come across ground source heat pumps. I think air source heat pumps, unfortunately have a bit more press at the moment. Tell us a little bit about what makes them different and almost what makes Kensa different as well.
Sure. Yeah, so, air source heat pumps, everyone looks at an air source heat pump. It's effectively something that we see on a daily basis. It's an air conditioning system, effectively, but we're predominantly using it to heat our buildings. And that just takes energy from the outside air and then eventually transforms it to be higher temperature so that it can heat radiators and heat your hot water cylinders. What we do with the ground source heat pump is we take the energy from the ground beneath our feet. So there's more civil engineering works that have to take place. We have to drill boreholes down to depths of 150, 200 metres or so. Oh, wow. But by doing that, we're actually taking an energy source that's got a more stable temperature. So typically the ground beneath our feet here in London is probably about 12 degrees. And it's it's that all year round. Whereas obviously the air temperature varies. So on the coldest day of the year in London, we could be at -3, -5, -10, whereas the temperature of the ground will still be around 12 degrees. So it's more efficient, a ground source heat pump. By being more efficient, that means you'll have lower running costs, which is great for the residents and the social housing. And it also means we'll have lower carbon emissions, which is then great for trying to hit our net zero 2050 targets. So that's, one of the key benefits. And then I think in terms of Kensa, we've been going for 26 years. So there are many people probably haven't heard of Kensa, but we're a true British success story. You have a manufacturing plant in Cornwall.
Oh, wow.
Yep. So we make all our products here in the UK, and we always welcome visitors to our factory. So please pop in, see how a heat pump's made, Martin, and we'll even give you a Cornish pasty or a cream tea. But you'll see ground source heat pumps, what they're made, and it's something that we can do everywhere. It's technology that exists today. We can start installing it everywhere, and I think it's how do we go out there, spread the word, and get more and more people, thinking about it. There's clearly going to be some projects where an air source heat pump will still be the right solution, but I think if people can just open their eyes to the technology and consider it for projects, I think you'll find it's more viable in places than people think.
So on top of being British manufactured, there's a couple of things that make Kensa unique, isn't there? You have a single focus on ground source heat pumps.
Right, yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that and why that's important.
Yeah, so I think Kensa, when we were formed in 1999, it was two marine engineers who were really excited about heat pump technology, and they were like, we can do this in people's houses. And they looked at all the different types of heat pumps and went, well, ground source heat pumps are the most efficient, so they will tackle climate change better than anything, and they'll make people's running bills the lowest. So let's do that. And by having that singular focus, we're trying to become the UK's experts on ground source heat pumps. And what I've found in the industry is if you do ground source heat pumps, but you also do air source heat pumps and you also do boilers, your focus isn't fully on ground source heat pumps. So your focus will be then like, well, we could do anything for you. And the natural thing for anyone when they've got multiple products is to probably go for the cheapest option, and that becomes the product that you would sell the more and push more to your customers. So we've decided, no, it's the best form of heating in the UK. We're going to stick to it. We want to be known as the experts, and we have to therefore be the experts, because if it doesn't work, Kensa wouldn't exist. So we have to be able to prove that ground source heat pump technology works in the UK.
And you take that expertise another step as well, because you're contractors as well.
Absolutely, and there's a big difference between being a manufacturer and a contractor. So Kensa first formed just as a manufacturer, so effectively, making white boxes in a factory, selling them to installation companies, selling them to private householders. And back in 2012, I think it was, we had a project with a housing association in the southwest, and we sold them a couple of 100 ground source heat pumps. But they couldn't find a contractor to design the systems or install the systems, so they came back to Kensa and went, we really like the product. We really like the fact that you're a UK company. We want it, but no one wants to fit them for us. Will you do that, Kensa? Whoa, that's a bit difficult. We're just a manufacturer. If you want to sell us 200 heat pumps, you come and do the whole job. And that's when the contracting division was born. And Kensa's then set out to how can we do this at scale? We cannot solve our net zero 2050 challenges by doing one house at a time. We need to do this at scale. And so therefore we need to sell 200 ground source heat pumps at a time. We need to do it on an estate by estate basis, or a street by street, or area by area. Yeah. And that's what Kensa's been trying to pioneer.
And I was going to ask you about that, because that's really where ground source heat pumps come into their own, isn't it? Is when you're installing them at scale on a closed loop system. You can have them obviously on individual dwellings, but that's it's more benefit on the social housing side when you're dealing with larger estates.
Absolutely, and that's what we've been pioneering over the last 10 years at Kensa. It's our shared ground loop solution. So with a shared ground loop solution, you have a cluster of properties together. So it could be a housing estate, it could be where you've got blocks of flats in close proximity, and it's all owned by the social housing provider. So you're working with one landlord; they all own the land. So we can design a system that will heat all of those buildings at the same time. So effectively what we do is we put our ground array infrastructure into the ground, we join those pipes together, and then we run a flow and return pipe work to a white box, our Kensa ground source heat pump, that's inside every property. So effectively it's very similar to the mains gas network that we're all familiar with. Mains gas network has a bunch of plastic pipes buried in the road. It has a heat fluid going through it, which obviously is gas, which is highly flammable and highly dangerous. But then that's connected to a white box in everyone's property, and people pay for their heating through their gas bill.
Yeah.
What we are doing with our shared ground source heat pump system is putting plastic pipes in the ground, which use the ground's energy. So it's, benign, non-toxic, non-flammable, very safe. And then we connect that all together. You put the Kensa shoebox ground source heat pump inside every property, and then the residents, homeowners, pay for their energy through their electric bill. So it's, very simple solution. It's sort of tried and tested. We're trying to, the mains gas system has served Britain well since the 50s. And it's been great. Lots of people have benefited from that, myself included. But we need to look to the future. We can't keep burning gas, so let's do something different.
I'd love to probe into the fact that they aren't as well known as air source heat pumps, and maybe the process isn't as well known either. So I'd love to probe into that. I'd love you to sort of explain maybe the experience from two sides. Firstly, the side of the landlord, or the housing provider. What's that like engaging with you? What sort of, it gives visions of I need a whole football pitch outside. There's all these sort of misperceptions. I'd love you to go into some of those, and then afterwards, I'd love to talk from the tenant's perspective as well, because, if I'm on a system, can I control it myself? There's all these misperceptions. I'd love you to touch on some of those, if you could.
Yeah, absolutely, Martin. So if you go from a landlord perspective, one of the first things we do is that education piece. Sitting down with someone and going, do you know about ground source heat pumps? No, not really. Right, here we go. So it's nuts and bolts. And it's what we're trying to do is then find a suitable site. So, blocks of flats work really well, whether that's low rise to high rise, or where you've got cluster property, so it could be like a row of terraced houses. So we'll work with the provider to find a suitable site. We'll then do some feasibility reports for them, free of charge, where we can actually show them how many boreholes we need to put in the ground. So what you need to do is, how much heat do we need to put into that building to keep it warm? So in the coldest day, what's its peak demand? And that helps us size the heat pump. And then over the course of the year, what's your annual heating demand? And what's your annual hot water demand? And once we've got that information, we can do some modelling on the ground. And we look at the underlying geology and make sure that we can put sufficient boreholes in. And in terms of how much land do you need, I've done simple projects with, say, street of bungalows, and you can end up with one borehole that just goes in the front garden of a bungalow, and that can probably heat 3 of those bungalows.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so if you've got, 3 sort of small, 1-bedroom terrace bungalows together, put a borehole in one garden, put the pipework up the gable end, and you run through the loft space, drop down, and we've served three properties. If you look at a block of flats, where say you've got 50 flats, we might need somewhere around 20 boreholes. And at that point, then yes, you need some space around the tower block. But that could be the car parks, it could be some of those green spaces. And it's hard to sort of put rules of thumb in this, but you're probably thinking that, if you've got your footprint of the building, on a tower block with 50 flats, probably if we've got, say, space of, say, 4 to 8 of those footprints, we've got half a chance that we can make it work. And we can vary the depth of the boreholes as well. So in some geologies, we can drill deeper. So we can maybe drill to 300 metres deep. And if you can do that, then obviously you need less boreholes because we're collecting more of the energy beneath us. So we can play around. And what you find is the landlords, once they get comfortable that there's enough space, I think once they also see some case studies, so they can see that, you've already done this, various other housing associations, they'll get familiar with it. Everyone's always worried about the big, infrastructure that we're putting in, but actually what we tend to find is that bit, both from a landlord perspective and a resident perspective, everyone finds quite exciting. Because, wow, what, we're really going to drill a borehole? And that's going to heat my house? Yeah, through the heat pump now. No. And, it's really exciting. And I think, if we then sort of move on to the residents, so it's engaging them before we've even put a spade in the ground. So, once we've had the chats with the landlords and we've found a viable site and we've developed a project and they've got the funding and they're moving forward with a contract, before we are going to site, we're having resident engagement meetings. So we've got a well-defined process now. So we've got booklets that explain what we do, and we make them available in whatever language it needs to be and all the rest of it. And then we'll sit and have a meeting. And people can come and ask questions. We're also going to do one-to-one door knocking. Because, sometimes in a meeting, people might be a bit reluctant to ask questions. But if you sit in the house and they're comfortable surroundings, people will open up and they'll tell you the fears of the system. And usually the fears are, you're going to take away the car park. And yes, in some cases, we're going to have to drill the boreholes in the car park. And that might mean that car park's closed for a couple of months.
Yeah.
But at the end of it, you'll be able to park in the car park again. You know, the beauty of a ground source heat pump is, yes, there's lots of groundworks where we're doing the job, but once we're finished, you would hardly know we'd been there because it's all put back to what it previously looked like. If it was a car park, it will become a car park. If it was a park, it would become, you know, grassy areas again. And most people's concerns usually start with, what's it going to look like in my house? And the beauty of what it's going to look like in the house is it's not going to look too dissimilar to a traditional gas boiler system. There will be a white box in a cupboard, so the Kensa shoebox heat pump. We will need a hot water cylinder. So, you know, with a gas combi boiler, you typically wouldn't have a cylinder. All heat pumps are going to need a cylinder, but usually we'll try and put the heat pump and the cylinder in the same cupboard, and then the rest of it is radiators and walls with pipework. And when people understand that, that reassures them a little bit. They're also worried about, controls. Yeah, it's new technology. That's going to be really complicated. The beauty is, the heat pumps, it's just a machine. We can use whatever controls we want to switch that on and off. So what we tend to do when we're working with our landlords is, what is your standard control system that you would fit with your boiler systems? And for many of them, it's we'll just use a dial thermostat and a twin channel programmer, and they'll have maybe a specific manufacturer. Okay, we'll use exactly the same.
Right.
Oh, we thought you'd need to have an app and this, and if you want all of that, you can have all of that.
Yeah.
But you don't need to. And I think, again, that helps reassure, because obviously in any type of housing, whether it's social housing or private housing, there's people that are, you know, vulnerable or older, or less familiar with technology, and they just want something simple.
Yeah.
And we can make it simple for people to use. And I think the other key thing when we're chatting to the residents through all of that is, especially if we're replacing a direct electric storage heating system, and your energy costs are going to go down. And that then solves a lot of issues, you know. And it's people then realising that they're getting a benefit. Yes, I can't park my car in the car park for a couple of weeks. You're going to be in my house for 3 to 5 days, maybe, you know, fitting the heat pump, doing some radiators, coming back, snagging, client sign off, all those things. But at the end of it, if I'm going to save some money, do you know what? Let's go for it.
Well, let's talk about the commercials as well. And actually, let's split that into two as well, and maybe talk about the commercials for the landlord as well. And you know, I think it'd be amiss if I don't ask what's the difference between installing air source and ground source in terms of that investment, maybe upfront versus long term as well. And then from the tenants, the experience of the savings that they can have.
Yeah, so the upfront cost, you know, I guess that's the big elephant in the room with a ground source heat pump. Ultimately, we have to install the infrastructure when we put a ground source heat pump in. With an air source heat pump, you just fit the air source heat pump in the wall. The infrastructure is the outside air, effectively. So probably in a typical social housing project, you're probably looking at that infrastructure is probably, £10,000 more to do the ground source, which is probably, 40 to 50% of the cost. So, it's a big upfront cost, and we can't hide away from that.
No.
The long-term benefit for the landlord is once they put that infrastructure in, that infrastructure should be lasting them at least 100 years.
Oh, wow.
So, yes, you have to pay for it on day one, but once you paid for it on day one, basically you can fit and forget that for the next 100 years. It's plastic pipework. Plastic hasn't actually been around long enough for us to know that it will last 100 years, but all the tests that have been carried out on this plastic pipework, it's the same pipework that's used in mains gas and mains cold water, so it's tried and tested technology. So they won't need to replace it. The only thing that they might need to upgrade is the heat transfer fluid that goes around it, and that's just a mix of water and glycol. Yeah. So that's a very simple thing for a traditional heating engineer to actually change. So that's the big cost. But for that extra investment on day one, it's there for 100 years. You will then have the ground source heat pump itself, because it's installed in someone's property, it's not exposed to the elements. It's not getting weather beaten, with the wind and the rain, and if it's near the seaside, the corrosive atmosphere. So the ground source heat pumps inside a property really should be lasting at least 25 years.
There's an aesthetics benefit as well, isn't there? Of course.
Yeah, there's nothing outside. That's a great point. All you're left with to see with the ground source heat pump outside is a manhole cover. This is where you would access the boreholes. There's no box, there's no fans, there's nothing to be vandalised as well, which I know is some of the conversations I've had with landlords. If we have lots of air source heat pumps outside, is that going to cause us problems, and they have to put them in cages?
And I suppose then you're not working at height, so there's no access issues.
No access issues whatsoever. We run all the pipeworks below ground. We then run even in a high-rise building, we run our pipework through the building. So there's no scaffolding going up. There's no external access. There's all access from inside. And then once it's inside someone's property, obviously that's a very benign environment. Heat pump lasts a long time. So from a landlord perspective, if we can find a way to work with them to overcome the additional upfront capital expenditure, then actually they get those long-term lifetime running cost savings. Obviously, if they've got a carbon target as well, net zero carbon, then the ground source heat pump being more efficient than the air source heat pump will save them more carbon in the long run. And probably replacement cycles for air source are probably in the region of, say, every 15 years. So they'll have to factor that in. Someone needs to go back and do it. If you're not having to do anything for 25 years, it's less disruption to the resident as well, because no one's having to really go and visit the property.
Before we go on to the resident costs, I'm just intrigued whether, is there planning issues with putting boreholes down, and I suppose especially around heritage sites as well?
Yeah, good question. So if you're not a listed building or a conservation area, then as long as your boreholes are going on what's called the curtilage of the dwelling, so basically on the land that is owned by that building,
Got you. Yep.
then there's no planning. So, we could go and drill a borehole tomorrow and don't need to get permission. It's quite crazy to think about it in some respects. We can just go and drill a 300-metre borehole in that tower block land because they own it and it's permitted development. But that's the planning laws that we've got in the UK, and that's obviously helped to drive the technology. Clearly, if you're a listed building in a conservation area, then you need to go and consult with the planning authority. There's a few other permissions. So, for example, when we're drilling, we might need to consult with the Environment Agency if we're going into certain types of aquifers. It's very few and far between, and that's a standard process. So, if you're in what's called a source protection zone 1, then you just follow a process and get permission to do it. And there's a few other things that you need to check clearly, like unexploded ordnance. What other buried services have we got in the ground that you don't need to do with air source? But clearly, air source heat pumps also got rules and regulations related. They are permitted development as well, provided they meet certain rules. So there's not too much extra burden for doing a ground source as doing an air source.
And I know this is obviously depends on a lot of factors, but what's the sort of time frame for an install? From breaking ground to completing the 40-50 flats.
Yeah, so if we talk about that typical site of 40-50 flats, in that scenario, we'd probably only be drilling, say, around 20 boreholes. If we're on a reasonable geology and a nice easy site to work on, we're always aiming for at least 2 boreholes a week. So if you're doing 20 boreholes, 2 boreholes a week with 1 drill rig, we get that done in about 10 weeks. We then have to do some connecting pipe work from the boreholes. We can have a bit of overlap because obviously once you've drilled some boreholes, you can have another team coming behind digging the trenches. But that would probably then carry on for an extra 2 to 3 weeks. At the same time that we're doing that, we could be installing the pipe work to run that through the flats to, say, the boundary of each door, so that then you can then connect that up. So as soon as the ground array is complete, fully pressure tested and ready to go, at that point we can start installing the first heat pump in the property. The heat pump inside the property, day one, we'll take out the existing heating system, take out the existing hot water system, put the new hot water cylinder in, run it on an immersion heater for day one, so the resident's never left without hot water. And then on day 2, we'll finish with the new radiator circuit, connecting the heat pump. So at the end of day 2, we'll have set the heat pump to run, and it will now be providing the heating and hot water.
Oh, wow.
Days 3 and 4 will be snagging, doing whatever making good we need to make good, and then showing the resident how to use the controls, and then having the client come in to do a quality check as well, so we can sign it off and say it's done. And that heat pump, even though we've still got, say, another 49 to do, that one is now connected to the array and is all working. And that's one of the beauties of the solution. Once the infrastructure's in, we can install the properties one at a time. And you don't need to necessarily install it in any order. So you could, ground floor flat, then we could go and do a top floor. So it makes it very flexible. And then it means that you can really progress that project. So on a typical 50 unit project, if we've had, say, about that 3 months of work in the ground, we can install, anywhere between 4 and 20 flats a week, depending on how fast the landlord wants to go. But if you were doing a block of 50, you'd maybe got about 8 a week. So that's 6 to 7 weeks.
Yeah.
So you're probably looking at, say, 5 to 6 months.
Yeah.
From the first spade in the ground to we've completely finished, everyone's heating's up and running, and we've left site. So yeah, there's some disruption for 6 months, but at the end of that 6 months, you're then left with a heating system that's there for the next 100 years.
Your approach on the infrastructure side is almost similar to what they do with cables. When they put it in the your cable broadband or whatever, isn't it? You take it to door and you're ready to connect when you want to.
Yeah, and that's also a really important thing, because especially when we're working in blocks of flats, sometimes there's some leaseholders in there.
Oh yeah.
And this is a question we get from housing providers all the time. Wow, in the properties that we own, we can work with our residents and they'll all have the system, but if it's a leaseholder, they might not want it. And at that point, it's like, well, we can take the infrastructure up to their door. You can have all the chats with leaseholders, we can chat with them as well. But if they decide not to have it, then they don't need to have it. But if they have a change of mind, or they sell the property and someone else comes in and decides they don't want the fossil fuel boiler or the electric storage heaters and they'd like to join into the system, it's then very easy for us to do that because the infrastructure sat outside the property.
So from the tenant's perspective, I've got a list of sort of perceptions or misperceptions maybe. People talk about they're noisy. People talk about you don't get hot water or as hot as you like it. People say the cost savings aren't that real. Can we sort of
absolutely
go through those three?
Yeah, so
there's probably some more as well.
There's lots of misperceptions. So in terms of noisy, what we try to do at Kensa is design the smallest and quietest heat pump that we can, so that it's suitable for UK properties.
And you call this a shoebox?
Yeah, we call it a shoebox.
And is it the size of a shoebox?
Unfortunately, if you've got big shoes.
Shaquille O'Neal shoes.
Yes, my shoes, I probably have a few pairs in there. It's a big cube, effectively. If people can imagine, something that's 600 millimeters in all
like
directions.
A carry-on case for if you're going on holiday.
Yeah, like that. So it's definitely, bigger than a pair of shoes, but not the size of like a fridge or a fridge freezer, which I think is what people think of when they think of those heat pumps. So we've tried to make it small. We've also tried to make it quiet, because clearly it's going inside someone's property.
Yeah.
Air source heat pumps go outside, and there's lots of people who have concerns about the noise outside and impacting the neighbours, and that's why there's the planning rules and permitted development rules. Whereas the ground source heat pump would go inside the property. I think the main thing that we're always trying to do is not install it in a cupboard that's someone's bedroom.
Got you.
Because clearly the heat pump could come on to heat the hot water, for example, in the middle of the night if the electricity is cheaper. So you just wouldn't want that to come on in a bedroom. I guess the easiest way is probably like a noisy fridge.
Yeah.
Because the technology of heat pumps, as I'm sure everyone knows, is very similar to a fridge. And what the fridge has got in it, when you hear that noise kicking in, it's a compressor. And effectively what we've got in the ground source heat pump is a larger compressor. And that's the bit that just makes a hum. But as soon as you put that in a cupboard, usually in a sort of a cupboard that's in the hallway, the door's closed, that cupboard's probably going to have carpet in it, it's probably going to have jackets, hoovers, ironing boards, you name it, and the sound's really muffled. So the noise isn't so much of an issue. I think we touched on what about the running cost savings. So I think a key one on that is it depends on what system you're replacing. So a lot of the work we've done to date has been replacing electric night storage heaters and putting a brand new ground source heat pump system in. And by doing that, we are conservatively saying to people you would expect to save at least 30% on your energy bill. But we've actually seen people save 50, 60, 70%. And it sort of depends on how residents are currently using the heating system. And what you tend to find is someone's got old electric storage heaters that are, say, 20, 30 years old. They're not working very well. No. And by 2 o'clock in the afternoon, there's no heat coming out of them. And some residents then are just cold.
It's that, and a lot of the electricity companies have changed the Economy 7 now, haven't they? It doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
Which a lot of people who had the storage heaters would have relied on.
They would have done, because that was the way to make that cheaper. And obviously, anything that's 20 or 30 years old is not as good as it was. So when we replace with a ground source heat pump, if people have been heating their home properly, and we've got examples, one of our residents in Thurrock Council, she was spending close to £3,000 a year on a 1-bed flat just on her heating and hot water, because our storage heaters would run out at sort of 2 o'clock in the afternoon. She's got a vulnerable son at home, so she needed to keep the property warm, so she would then just plug in room heaters. And if you plug in lots of room heaters in your property, you're just chewing up electricity. She's now gone to a ground source heat pump system from us, and she's saying to us it's probably £600 to £700 a year.
Wow.
So massive saving for her. So the savings are real. If you're going against a gas boiler system, the savings won't be as significant. And the main reason for that is that gas is cheap. If everyone looks at the Ofgem sort of price caps, which most of us are probably on unless you've got a fixed deal, the difference between your unit of gas and unit of electricity is probably about 3. So, gas is 3 times cheaper than electric. If you put a ground source heat pump in compared to a gas boiler, it will be just over 3 times more efficient than the gas boiler.
Yeah.
But if the price of electric is 3 times more than gas, then the running cost savings are minimal. The main savings you'll get is if you're replacing gas, we're always recommending as the Housing Association to remove gas completely. So take out gas cookers as well if they exist. And then by removing the gas completely, you take away the gas standing charge. And then the property's only got direct electric going into it, and therefore your gas standing charge is about £100 to £120 a year, depending on which supplier you're with. You would automatically save that, and then you would make a small saving. So we can show a saving against gas, but clearly, nowhere near is what it is.
But I suppose from a landlord perspective as well, this is massively future-proofing you, especially around your EPCs as well, and what you need to bring your flats up to standard.
Absolutely, and we're also seeing that the EPCs are going to be getting improved and developed over the coming years, and I think that will also be showing that it's more favourable to be putting heat pumps in.
Yeah.
Especially as we continue to decarbonise the grid. I think as well there's a little known change in policy where all the taxes that are paying for things like feed-in tariffs and the government grants were all put on the electric cost. Whereas a couple of years ago, the government then said, okay, there's now the ability to put some of those taxes onto the cost of gas. And I think what we need to see happen, and clearly it needs to be done in a phased way. If we just put gas up overnight, we've now put most of the UK in fuel poverty, because gas is still probably in 90% of people's properties in the UK. But we do need to work in a phased way of making gas more expensive, and not necessarily making electricity cheaper. If you maintain the electricity price, but gas continues to get more expensive, then instead of it being 3 times the difference, it becomes twice, and all of a sudden the heat pumps will save more money. And I think we need a sort of long-term path and long-term vision to that.
We're going to come on to sort of what the government need to do, and maybe some of the policy changes that needs to accelerate things. But I'd love to just touch on maybe some of the success stories that you've had. Some people love hearing about case studies, and you've got some fantastic ones. You've done just recently quite a complex, I think, central London retrofit with Clarion Housing.
Yes.
Tell us about that, and maybe some of the challenges that working in a very affluent area of central London as well.
Yeah. So it's one of these projects where everyone goes, "There's no way you can fit ground source heat pumps there." Stuart, don't be daft. And you go, "No, I think we can do it." So it was 81 flats. They were built in 1913, between 1913 and 1950. So over 100 years old. So clearly when they were built, they're solid walls. They'd actually been left derelict for 5 years because the Housing Association weren't sure what to do with them. So in a complete, utter state of disrepair. At one point, the Housing Association were looking at getting these knocked down, but it went all the way to the Secretary of State, who said, "Nope, can't knock these down. It's important social housing in central London."
Yeah.
As you say, it's in heart of Chelsea, so lots and lots of expensive real estate around there. So it's like, no, you've got to keep these properties. And fair play to Clarion, they kept them, and then go, well, the easiest thing for them to do would have been, okay, we'll do them up. There's gas supply on site. Let's just use gas. No, let's do something different. So I went out to site over 5 years ago, and again, that shows how long some of these projects take. So over 5 years ago, I went out to site and walked the site, understood that we were going to try and make what fabric improvements they could. They couldn't do much to the external facade, but they put some internal wall insulation. They upgraded the windows to sort of new double glazing. So, certainly not taking it to the standards of a new build house, but, it wasn't quite as bad as a house that's over 100 years old. It was as good as it could do. We then did our calculations to work out, what size of heat pump would they need, and then how many boreholes. And there wasn't a lot of space because you've got, block of flats and then another block of flats, and there was a finger of land between them. And there's sort of 4 blocks of flats with 4 fingers of land. And effectively what we're able to do...
literally like an alleyway?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was probably maybe the width of 2 cars. Like you could probably have 2, maybe 3 at a push. Like if you had 3 cars side by side, you probably... And with those fingers of land, they weren't particularly long. We worked out that we could get the drill rig down one of them. And then if you put the drill rig all the way down and drilled a hole and then reversed it, drilled another hole, then reversed it and drilled another hole, we could get enough boreholes in for that block. Then out onto the road, take the drill rig down the road into the next sort of finger of land alleyway, exactly the same thing, into the fireplace and reverse it. And clearly there was a lot of coordination with our trades that were on site because the properties were getting fully refurbished. So, we couldn't be there when the scaffolding was up because there then wasn't enough space. But that was a challenge. Other challenges you have in London is, in that particular site, we ended up finding there's an underground air raid shelter, which everyone was delighted about. Oh, that's interesting, isn't it? See, when you're putting a ground source, you don't really want interesting. You just want boring because we've done all the underground sets, so we know where the gas pipe are, we know where the electric cables are, we know where everything. Yeah, no tubes. We've done the check. We've checked that there's no unexploded. So you've done all these checks, but air raid shelters don't show up in any check that you do, and no one in the estate knew about it. It wasn't the biggest problem. It was when we were doing some of our trenching, so you just have to find another route. But it shows that on a congested site in central London, you can imagine it's like Spaghetti Junction down there, and there was an air raid shelter. We still managed to get 27 boreholes in on this site to feed the 81 properties, and then the 81 properties, they've all got the Kensa shoebox heat pump, hot water cylinder, brand new radiators, simple control system. All the residents are now moved in, and clearly we haven't yet gone through the full winter cycle, but everyone's been happy. They're all happy with the amount of hot water they're getting at the moment, happy with the new system, and as we go through the winter now. But it's one of those projects where we just ticked a lot of this off. Can't do it in central London, tick. Can't do it in dense urban environments, tick. Can't do it in flats that are over 100 years old, tick. Can't do it in flats full stop, tick. What other myths do you want to throw at me?
Well, I'd like to talk about your next case study, actually, which poses another challenge, which was Chadwell St Mary, which was a huge high-rise. We talked a lot about mid-rise, really, at the moment, but what's some of the challenges working on a big high-rise?
Yeah, and, big high-rises, I think, are a challenge for us in the UK as a whole, because I think they're one of these building archetypes that are seen as hard to treat, difficult to decarbonise. But we've now done over 30 tower blocks in Kensa. And by a tower block, I'm sort of talking, as soon as we're above 7, 8 stories. So Chadwell St Mary, that was with Thurrock Council. All the properties were heated with direct electric storage heaters. They've been in for 20, 30 years. And, the example, Diane, spending lots of money, £3,000 a year. How do we take her out of fuel poverty? How do we decarbonise the block? And Thurrock Council had looked at different options. Should they put gas in? But they didn't want to go gas because it's like, well, that seems to be taking us backward. Plus, there's health and safety issues with gas and tower blocks. They didn't want to go down that route. They could have just replaced direct electric with direct electric, but haven't tackled fuel poverty then. The residents would still be on an expensive system. Then they looked at central plant systems. So, a sort of more traditional central plant communal heating system. So you could then have either a big ground source heat pump, big air source heat pump, or another big boiler. The issue you've got with them is they generate that hot water centrally, so probably in the basement, and then you have to circulate that water 24 hours a day, 7 days a week around the building, just in case someone at some point wants to switch on a tap and have hot water or switch the heating on.
You've probably got shared bills and
there's the metering and billing regulations, and that's all changing, and Thurrock Council looked at all of that and went, whoa, hang on a minute, there's a lot of admin involved for us to do that. We'd have to set up the ESCO. Residents are then paying their bills to us. If the resident defaults on their heating, we have to sort that out. And also, the residents are then at the mercy of that provider. So if Thurrock then said, well, we'll outsource that, if the resident's not happy with the supply or the cost of heat, tough, because that's where you're getting heat. So actually, when they boiled down, they went, your solution is the best solution for us, but how do we make it work in the tower block? That was a building that still had some unfilled cavities, so we got the cavities filled, and they brought in a contractor who did that on abseil, which was quite a novel way of filling the cavity wall, putting the insulation in. So again, that just made the building fabric as good as you could do on a 1960s tower block. And again, then it was like, right, how are we going to do the project? And much like we've discussed, get the infrastructure in. They got a large car park. The trouble we had there was closing the car park meant that everyone's parking in the surrounding streets.
So what's the scale of this project? How tall is this project? How many flats is it?
Yeah, great question. So 273 flats across 3 tower blocks, and each tower block was 15 stories.
So you're dealing with a huge amount of residents.
Yeah, dealing with a huge amount. So probably
big parking needs.
Yeah, there's probably at least 500 to 600 residents on that site.
Yeah,
the car park was always full. So it was working with the residents, from an early stage, engaging with them, and then working with the council through the resident liaison officers, and we worked out a plan to close the car park in phases. So clearly we have to close parts of the car park to drill the boreholes, They would close the car park, drill the boreholes, do the trenching and headering, get it all resurfaced, and then that bit of the car park could be reopened, and then we go and close another bit. So you're never closing all of the car parking spaces. We then try to find alternative areas where they could park cars. So there's some grass verges, which weren't parking spaces, but for the duration of this, we were able to put matting down and create some additional car parking spaces. So we were really trying to minimise that disruption. And then, again, we put all the infrastructure into each block of flats, and only once all the infrastructure and the ground array could be switched on did we start going property by property to install the heat pumps. But I think the key thing, and we talked about it a lot already today, is communication with the residents. Taking them on that journey with us. There was a lot of anxious people, some angry people at times, because I've always parked my car there, and you're just going to get in the way, and this is but it's working with and showing them the benefits. And clearly replacing old failing electric storage heating. The running cost savings are remarkable for these residents now, and it's made a big impact on people's lives. It genuinely has improved people's lives. And going back to why did I get into this job in the first place, when you see people who are like, wow, I can now afford to heat my home, it's always warm, I've got enough hot water, and I've got more money in my pocket than the previous. That's what we should be doing.
They quickly forget the disruption.
They do, and I think this is it. Clearly there's lots of, but if you went back there now, you wouldn't really know we'd been there, because you'd look at the only bits of the car park, I'd say, you would see where the manifold chambers are, but the car park is now a car park. The areas of grass that they had are now areas of grass again. It's nothing to see here, sort of thing.
I think all of these case studies really showcase the importance, I think, of the client, the local authority, the architect, whoever the client ends up being, is working with the supply chain. And in this case, you're in that unique position where you're both the manufacturer and the contractor and the experts. But I think that really shows the importance of that partnership.
Absolutely. We have to work really closely, because we have to, explain how the system's going to work. But I think it's also important, you've rightly pointed out, we're a manufacturer and a contractor, and I think that means that there's one point of responsibility. There's a lot of, and through my career, I've seen lots of problem systems. And what tends to happen is people go, these heat pumps, they don't work. So everyone blames the heat pump, but in my opinion, it's very rarely the heat pump, because the heat pump's just a machine. And most of them have been designed really well, and they come out of the factory working. The heat pump's not working because it's probably been designed incorrectly, installed incorrectly, commissioned badly, and there might be a bit of user error in there. Because what we're trying to do is work with our partners, in the housing associations and local authorities, and go, it's our heat pump, so we know exactly what it's going to do. We will then design the system. We will then install it and commission it. And if at any point through any of that process it's not working and you're not happy, come and speak to me, because this whole project is got Kensa's name on it. So it's clearly in our best interest to make it work. And having worked for other manufacturers in the past, I know from bitter experience that the box that has the manufacturer's name on it, they will always be the company that gets the call when something goes wrong. So it's like, if we've installed it, it's up to us to put it right. But because we know what we're doing, they work.
I think something that people are really keen to understand or learn about as well is post-occupancy data as well. And you've got you're in a really privileged position. You've done so many amazing projects. Love to just get your experience for maybe in some of the monitoring that you've done, and in particular, we talked a lot about cost savings, but maybe some of the carbon savings as well. And I know you've got a fantastic case study that talks about that for Ashford.
So we've been working closely with Ashford Council. They've put in, I think, is about 70 heat pumps across a range of different property types, and it's working with them to now understand what are the savings that we're getting. So typically when we're going up against direct electric systems, we're getting carbon savings that are probably around the 60%. Gas boilers, in the moment when we're taking out a gas boiler, carbon savings are typically around the 80% mark. And as we continue to decarbonise the electric grid, then those savings will in not too many years be over 90%. And with the plans by sort of 2050 to have almost a net zero electricity grid, effectively you get to the point where you're 99% savings against carbon, and that's clearly important, because these technologies have to go in and they have to to deliver on that carbon savings. That's why we're putting heat pump technology in. So I think it's going hand in hand with the running cost savings for the residents, improving the carbon savings. We're also looking at ways in which we can develop that monitoring to make it easier to install, because sometimes with a lot of the monitoring you have to install additional meters, and we're looking at systems whereby we can incorporate that within the Kensa box, so that you can actually see the efficiencies of the heat pumps real time, and then you can have a little dashboard and things like that, and we're trying to develop that in the sort of the next generation of equipment.
Right. So this podcast is one part of our retrofit series, but actually when people usually hear the word heat pump, they think about, if it's great in a passive house or, build or a new build that's highly insulated. That's one of the myths that I'd like to discuss, really, because, you're now retrofitting these at scale.
Yeah. So that's probably the biggest myth of all for heat pumps, I think. You can only ever install a heat pump in a well-insulated house. All a heat pump is a machine that produces heat. So we could heat any building in the UK, and the example I always use is a greenhouse. I always think of a greenhouse as the worst insulated building in the UK. It's made of glass. And if someone came to us with a greenhouse and say, I want you to heat that to be 21 degrees C in the middle of winter when it's -10 outside, we could do that. We would need quite a big heat pump. We would need quite a lot of boreholes drilled in the ground, and clearly we'd need to have a big heat emitters in there. But we could do that. Would that consume lots of energy? Absolutely. Would that cost a fortune to run? Absolutely. But it would do if we did the same with a gas boiler, because we'd need to put the exact same amount of heat into that building, whether it's coming from a heat pump, a gas boiler, an oil boiler, direct electric. So fundamentally, you can use a ground source heat pump to heat any building. Clearly, if we can put some insulation into the building to reduce that energy consumption, the size of the heat pump would be smaller, the size of the ground array would be smaller, and the energy bills would be smaller. But it is a complete myth that you can only fit heat pumps into new buildings. We can definitely do it in old buildings, and we've got examples, old period listed buildings where there's ground source heat pumps going in there. It all fundamentally comes back to the design, and I think sometimes in the UK we don't put enough time, effort, and money into design. And I think there's been a lot of times with gas boilers over the years where you don't need to do a lot of design, because gas boilers are inherently oversized when installed in someone's property. They've got more power than you'll ever need. So therefore it's just going to work. And there's lots of additional capacity, so it just heats up very quickly. We don't have that luxury in heat pumps. We have to get the design right. But as long as you get that design right, we can heat any building, but you have to understand the characteristics of the building first.
Let's talk about the retrofit challenge that we have in the UK, because government outlined that net zero 2050, million homes. I was going to ask you, are we on track? I think it's pretty obvious we're not. But what's holding us back? That's a big question.
That is a big question. What is holding us back? So you're absolutely right. We need to retrofit sort of 1 million buildings a year between now and 2050. The government also had a target that would install 600,000 heat pumps a year by 2028. I think last year it was less than 100,000 that we did across the whole industry. Wow. So that's residential, commercial, air source, ground source, every flavour of heat pump and every flavour of building. We didn't even get to 100,000 in 2024, and we probably won't be that far away from that in 2025. So what's holding us back? I think there is government policies that could be changed. I think trying to balance the gas and electric cost is one thing. Gas is still so cheap. I know everyone's been hit by energy bill increases and the cost of living crisis, and for me to say gas is still so cheap, that would be hard for people to hear, but compared to electricity it is.
And they've backtracked, haven't they, a little bit on phasing out gas?
Yes.
That's been extended.
Yeah, because there was talk that we might, by 2035, that we might be no longer able to install a gas boiler in a retrofit project. As you say, that's gone now.
Yeah.
So if your gas boiler fails and you're a large housing association landlord and you've got to make decisions and you're on a tight budget, you can install a gas boiler without any consequences. So I think we do need to look at that, and we have to have a pathway. I think a pathway to when will it be phased out. I think some kind of pathway to how we rebalance the gas and electricity pricing. I think we also need to look at how we we identify areas of the country that are best suited to different technologies. There's been a lot of talk about zoning or heat zoning, but I think fundamentally, if we leave it all to consumer choice, I think we'll end up with a bad outcome.
Yeah.
I live in a terraced house in Hertfordshire, typical street that you'll find up and down the country. We're all on mains gas at the moment. If we leave it to all the people that live in my street to decide what they'll do, some of them will eventually probably install an individual air source heat pump, which probably won't necessarily save them a great deal of money, but they've made their choice. If too many people on that street decide to put an individual air source heat pump, there's no incentive for anyone to probably come in and put, say, a shared ground loop solution, because that shared ground loop solution, if we're going to put the infrastructure in for every property, you need every property to eventually connect to therefore pay for the infrastructure that went in. Like we all pay a gas standing charge today, that maintains the infrastructure. Let's put a shared ground loop down the street, but everyone eventually needs to pay for the infrastructure, otherwise no one's going to put it in. But if you have too many individual air source heat pumps, no one's going to put the infrastructure in. But the shared ground loop was probably the best solution for that local area, was probably the best solution for the UK, and was also the best solution for the residents, because if you put the infrastructure in, then the residents can put a ground source heat pump in their properties. That will give them lower running bills than an air source. They don't maintain the infrastructure because that will be maintained by you. So I think we need that sort of joined up thinking, where the policy is matching some of the way that technology is developing. Now, if you take our shared ground loop solution, we still do not have the same rights as, say, the gas company. So if you want to install a gas pipe down a street, it's allowed. Right. It's got that status. It's a utility, utility, gas, electric, and people. I had the other day, there was a problem with the gas pipe outside our street, and all of a sudden there's guys there just digging a hole in the road, no prior notice, but they've got permission to do that. If we started to do that down the street with our boreholes and the ground source heat pumps, clearly we need to get planning. So I think we need to make it easier to put heat networks in, give us the same rights as the other utilities. So I think there's clearly a few things that can be done to try and change that policy agenda.
So the government come out with, the big headline, this much grant funding's going in. Why is it not being spent?
Yeah, I mean, that's, and again, another great question. So, clearly we do a lot of work in the social housing section of Kensa. That's what I spend most of my daily life doing. And we've just had the Warm Home Social Housing Fund for housing associations across England. And they all put bids in to the government. Yeah. And the cumulative total of those bids was about £2.5 billion. But the government only had £1.2 billion. So therefore couldn't fund all the projects. So the government have then had to say, okay, well, we'll spend that 1.2 billion, but they've then gone back to all the housing associations and local authorities, and everyone's got typically between 40% to 60% of the grant. A few got most of it, but most bids got only between 40 and 60%. So then all those housing associations and local authorities now have to decide, do they have more of their own money to put in to do the amount of properties that they bid for? And in most cases, the answer is no. So they're now all having to reevaluate what the priorities are, having to get approval from the board, and all of a sudden, it just becomes a very slow process. And, in the first few months of Warm Home Social Housing Fund, hardly any money's been spent. And I think we need to get better in the UK. So you've got some projects. How can we break down some red tape? How can we break down some bureaucracy? How can we go from these big announcements that there's lots of funding and just make it happen? Clearly there's got to be checks and balances, but I wonder if sometimes we've made it so complicated. I genuinely speak to some authorities and housing associations who have decided not to apply for funding because they're like, it's so difficult to apply for the funding, and actually there's a lot of bureaucracy when we get it. We're better off not doing it. But then they don't have their own money. So clearly we need government funding. Without government funding, just about every project I've been involved in social housing wouldn't have happened. But I think we also have to be realistic. There's not going to be enough government funding to take us to net zero 2050. And that's where we have to look at how do we bring private funding into the mix. And that's some of the innovations that we're looking at Kensa. We're a heat pump manufacturer, a heat pump installer, and now we're having to look at ways that we can maybe bring finance to the table because local authorities and housing associations and central government need the support of the private sector.
Am I right in saying that Scotland's had a little bit more success than England in terms of accessing some of this funding and allocating it properly. Is it worth just talking about some of the differences there between
Absolutely,
the two?
yeah. So in Scotland, we've got the Scottish Heat Network Fund, and we've successfully worked with quite a few housing associations to get that money for some of their projects, and we're actually on site at the moment in Renfrewshire.
Right.
180 flats across 2 tower blocks, and they've received around about 30 to 35% of the funding through the Scottish Heat Network Fund. And that was enough for them to, give them enough funding to then make it affordable to do the rest of it. The way it's been set up in Scotland, you can apply at any time, whereas the way that the Warm Homes funding was set up in England was there's a deadline. Everyone had to get their application in by the deadline, and then it's now all been allocated, and there'll be you've got your funding, spend it over the next 3 years, there'll be no more funding, was what they're hoping to do in Scotland. The next lot of funding will probably be announced early part of 2026, and we're expecting, obviously it could change, but we're expecting that it'll be a rolling round of grants. So you can put an application in, do a project, and if it's gone well and you want to do more projects, you can put another application in. And I know that there's been some devolved funding, so West Midlands Combined Authority and Greater Manchester Combined Authority, they had devolved Warm Home Social Housing Fund, and they've looked at trying to set the models up differently. So I think people and organisations are trying to work out what is the best way to support our housing providers to access this funding. And I think we often end up with funding whereby there's just arbitrary dates where things end. And what you sometimes end up with is a mad panic and a mad rush to get the funding, then we've got to spend it, and that can sometimes end up with bad decisions and bad outcomes. Because if there's an arbitrary date and you need to spend funding, has the project been properly thought through? So I think, again, it's that how do we balance that? I guess every funding stream needs a deadline at some point, but can we be a little bit more flexible? If people have got a good project and it's going to go well and it's going to deliver the outcomes we need, then can we make it maybe easier to make sure that it could be extended for a little bit of time, provided that the outcomes are met?
I think we can all agree there's a change needs to happen.
We need change, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. We always finish the podcast on innovation, and Kensa 26 years, at the forefront of ground source heat pump innovation. I'd love to just sort of glimpse into what does the future hold, because with your shoebox you've developed a small compact sort of solution there. Can you get smaller? What's next?
So I always challenge my R&D team. Can we make it smaller? Can we make it quieter? Can we make it more efficient? And ultimately, can we make it cheaper as well? Because I think one of the big innovations that we have to do in our industry is how do we keep bringing the cost down? And that's not just the cost of the product, that's the cost of the whole solution. So that's the challenge to the R&D team. One of the ways in which the cost can come down, and we are seeing it as Kensa, we're a growing company, we're selling more heat pumps year on year. If you build more of these heat pumps at scale, they're cheaper because we can automate processes in the factory. We can then buy the raw components at a better price. So that's a key way in which we can bring costs down. I think other ways in which we can look at developing the technology is how do we link into sources of waste heat. So what we do at Kensa, obviously with our shared ground loop, we put boreholes in the ground and we take heat out of the ground to then go into our ground source heat pumps, provide heating and hot water. But if we can put heat into the ground from a waste heat source, then actually we're making the ground more efficient. So can we take waste heat, for example, from data centres? Now, there's been a lot of information in the news about data. Are they good for the environment, bad for the environment? I think data centres are here to stay. ChatGPT and all the mobile phones and everything, they're here to stay. But they generate a lot of waste heat. How do we capture that waste heat? A typical, data centre, when it needs cooling, you put a chiller on there, the waste heat just goes to the atmosphere. If we can take the waste heat, put it into our boreholes, the ground infrastructure, we store that waste heat to be used in this building over here or that building over there to help power their ground source heat pump and produce heating and hot water. There's a really exciting project we're involved in Cambridgeshire, the Melbourne Energy Superloop, and what we're looking to do there is actually get a data centre installed in the village. The data centre will get a lot of the electricity to run from a PV system that's installed in a nearby field.
Right.
So it's generating a lot of electricity. We run a private wire to the data centre, and then the data centre, waste heat will hopefully go into a network of boreholes and ambient loop, and the plan being that we could put this network around the whole village of Melbourne and Cambridgeshire. I think there's about 2,000 to 3,000 properties there. So actually, you could take that whole village and put them all on ground source heat pumps, all being supported by the data centre, and all because the ground temperature would be nice and warm with the waste heat going from the data centre. All of those ground source heat pumps would be more efficient than any other form of heating system you could put in there, including gas. So everyone in the village could have that solution. It would be cheaper for them to run. And, the team's now looking at various models, but because private residents could get the boiler upgrade scheme in that case, so it's still a retrofit project. It's not social housing, but a lot of it private housing. They could get the boiler upgrade scheme. That would give them a grant of $7,500. Hopefully that would actually cover all or most of the install. So you're actually going to people in a street and going, you can have this solution, you need to apply for this grant, but for either no upfront cost or small upfront cost, you get the latest in renewable energy technology, decarbonise your heating, save energy bills. And I think that's, I guess, I look at that project and think, if we hadn't have done the projects that we're doing in the social housing sector to prove that shared ground loop technology works, then we couldn't be looking at these things. And if that kind of a project could work in that scale, that could work anywhere in the UK. And that's how we do mass scale retrofit. If we're going to do 1 million houses a year, we've got to think big. We can't just go, well, this one house can have a bit of insulation and your heat pump, and then we'll do it with that one. It's like, how do we do it a village at a time?
Amazing. So if I'm a local authority or I'm a housing association, I'm listening to this going, do you know what, I think I need to get involved. How do we get involved with Kensa? How do people reach out to you? We'll put some links, in the bio as well.
Absolutely. So please, go on our website. You'll find contact details for Kensa. Look me up on LinkedIn, Stuart Gadsden. We want to just sit down and have conversations with people. Let's have a look at your stock. What properties are giving you the biggest headache at the moment? We've done that with a few housing associations. What's your biggest problem site? Well, it's this one, and we can't find a solution. Okay, let us have a look at it. Can we come up with a solution for you? And work with you. Let's put budget costs together. How can we help you get the right level of funding? If housing providers have got warm homes funding at the moment, you can, even if you haven't spoken to Kensa already, you can use some of that funding to go on a Kensa system. We've spoken to the government, we've spoken to RISE, who are supporting local authorities, and they are up for change requests.
Right.
So, and we can go tomorrow. We've got a solution. We can go tomorrow. We've got our own drilling rigs, we've got our own design teams. Clearly, we make the heat pumps in our factories. We're ready to go. We just want to speak to people, work with it, and make a difference.
Stuart, brilliant. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you for the amazing positive impact that you're having on the built environment.
Thanks for inviting me, Martin. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you.